Welcome back, and thank you all for joining us here at Live Now from Fox, where we are continuing to follow this developing story out of Coachella, California. Riverside County's sheriff's office there saying that deputies arrested a man from outside of that rally just before the former president actually touched down in Coachella. Now, that man was taken into custody on charges of firearms charges. He did have some loaded handguns in his car, and there are some questions as to whether he had official credentials. But I think the biggest part of this story is that when it first broke, the sheriff there at Riverside County had said that he believes his deputies thwarted what could have been a possible third attempted assassination against the former president. I want to dive down to all these details right now with former FBI Special Agent Scott Duffey. Scott, the first question I think it would be worth to kind of re-rack to our viewers here and anybody that could be watching, what really constitutes an attempted assassination? What falls under that criteria?
Yeah, great question, and glad to be with you this evening, CAREL. So let's go back even just to July and then September. So if you remember, the you actually had former President Trump being shot, and then of course the shooter being taken out by Secret Service snipers on a nearby roof. Even though everyone was calling it a attempt assassination on the life of former President Trump, the FBI was just a little bit slow to jump on that same bandwagon for good purposes. Um, with regards to hey, we have to prove the elements of a crime, but then quickly jumped on to say no, this was a attempt assassination. Then, of course, you jump into September, you have an individual that it looks like, hey, they're waiting for a line of sight. An individual that pointed a long gun barrel through the bushes that's observed by a um, Secret Service agent doing an advance from hole to hole on a golf course, and believes so that this is imminent danger, if not to the president, definitely to those on the golf course, to include the Secret Service agent. So he lays he fires at the barrel, and then of course causes the individual to flee, who subsequently stopped. So you have those two individuals. One, you have an absolute shot at Vice President or former President Trump. And the elements of the crime, for example, doing a little research, the U.S. code that covers assassinations, kidnappings, assaults, and then, of course, assassination, attempt assassination of the president, vice president, designees, is in the U.S. code, and it's 1751, and then, of course, some subsets. In that, it also describes what are the elements of a crime. So every investigator, special agent, whatever have you, when they are investigating a crime, have to prove those elements of the crime. And once you have those elements of the crime, then you can go ahead and proceed with a charge. It is also noted in that code that the person shooting, or in the last two cases, a shooting and attempt shooting, that they do not have to know that they are causing injury, wanting to cause injury to the president. In other words, as I said back in July, the shooting by then Crooks, that the shooting of itself, the fact that he hit the president, whether he was intending to or not, is an attempt assassination of a former president. It would satisfy the elements of that crime. And then the second one being that he didn't get any shots off, but that everything seemed to fit. Well, what else was he doing? He definitely wasn't hunting. He shouldn't have had a gun, and the barrel was laid pointing towards the direction of where the former president was going to be within minutes. It is, and so upon his arrest, he was arrested for firearm violations, an obliterated serial number on a weapon, and that was a placeholder to hold him in custody, not to let him be able to make any type of a bail during a detention hearing. And then subsequently, in order to prove the elements of the crime of an attempt assassination, um, that he was subsequently charged, right? So the elements were satisfied both in the first and the second. And then, of course, the FBI was able to look at his readings through his digital media, through whatever devices he had, and he had quite a few that they were able to come up with, even though he did not state anything to interviewers that he had given enough information to say, my intent is to have caused harm, and then somebody else, if I'm not successful, take up the mantle. So those are two clear attempt assassinations, one being charged and then the other one being deceased. Here, you have and I loved watching the press conference from the sheriff. So, with the past two events only happening with a span of 2 months, here being October, a month after the second attempt, that sheriff was not going to allow anything on his watch to take place. So he described a second perimeter, a secondary perimeter, an outer perimeter, internal perimeter. For him, that is just his personnel alone to cover traffic and so forth, not to even include the secondary for when you actually get out of your car and then have to proceed through magnetometers and other sorts of modes of security. So you have weapons. You have a an individual who is telling different names by the fact that he has different IDs with those different names. The fact that he had what like the sheriff saying, obvious fraudulent plate. So it's not a plate that he took off another car, put it on his car, and you wouldn't know anything different unless you actually, what law enforcement can do is run a plate. But he described it as a homemade. I've seen those. It's either like a cardboard or some other where you handprint, and it's obviously a fraudulent plate. I've seen people who have had their plates stolen and then they think they can just write the same tag number, place it on their car, so they're susceptible to a stop. So it was just great security in the sense that okay, the primary, the outer perimeter, picked it up. They probably saw this car go through and saying, well, "Look at that plate." And my guess is the secondary perimeter security said, "Okay, this is not going to go through already." And then, of course, with their conversations with the individual, realize they're not even getting a straight answer. So all that, of course, especially on the heels of two attempt assassinations on the former president, would absolutely lead a logical conclusion, and I mean just an assumption that what could have this been? It could have been another attempt. Um, and so I can absolutely see the sheriff saying that. However, the attempt assassination now is turned over, the attempt assassination investigation is turned over to the FBI. And so now the FBI, like with Ruth, has to go through everything that this guy is about. Um, does he own computers? They're going to try to figure out, okay, let's go and get search warrants. Did he possess a phone at the time? And where is that phone now? I'd be interested to know if it was released back to Mr. Miller and so forth. It sounds like he didn't provide a statement to investigators, and I could easily see that as when he identified him as a member of the sovereign nation, having dealt with a couple of members when I was back on the job. That does take it to another level, where you're take aside the fact that he's coming into a rally with guns, which you shouldn't have. Nobody should have. Even law enforcement who are allowed to have guns, if they don't have any job duties of security at a rally, you got to check that gun. It's not coming with you. So for an individual who may or may not think that he can have weapons at any time, regardless of federal or state laws, um, it does give me pause with regards to where will the attempt assassination investigation go into, because you already have an individual that um, sovereign nation individuals have a tendency to have multiple names. They also have a tendency to have multiple forms of ID. They may not be legitimate, they may be fraudulent, just like the plate that was on his car.
So, Scott, kind of going forward now, because we do know that he was taken into custody, he was also released from these
Yeah.
state charges for possessing those firearms. But now that the FBI is involved, if it's possible that this could have been an attempted assassination, but this is all speculation, and that is something that we heard time and time again from that briefing from the Riverside County Sheriff's Office in California. What would the FBI have to find to be able to corroborate this being an attempted assassination? In other words, to no longer make it an assumption. What does the FBI need to do? What would have to meet that criteria?
Yeah. And they're very well done. Assumptions obviously cannot constitute um, evidence, and so thereby the elements of the crimes that he was arrested for, violation of firearm violations, right, for the state of California, and every state is a little bit different. I imagine California having some very strict laws with regards to firearms, especially for someone who is transporting firearms from one state to another. Um, so, with regards to the firearm violations, absolutely they are done. I imagine investigators wanted to know the reasoning for bringing firearms to a rally of the former president on the heels of two attempt assassination that, with everyone with a little bit of common sense, would understand that if you are bringing a weapon, much less several weapons, into an area that is protected, you cannot have weapons in there. What is your intention? Um, it's not like you are licensed to carry a firearm. You walk into, let's say, a courthouse, and you forget that you have your firearm on, and then security um, realizes, hey, you have a weapon, and then of course you realize, okay, I have a weapon, but I'm not allowed to carry it into a courthouse or whatever other restricted areas, an airport, etc. So common sense would say, okay, I have a license to carry, but I couldn't but I should have realized I should not be on that property because my license is no longer valid. Sort of something like this. So the FBI now has to look at everything that he owns digitally wise in order to see what can they obtain search warrants for: phones, computers, anything else. I would say even his car. So was his vehicle impounded? Was there anything in that car, for example, writings, notepads, anything that would be from him to indicate what his mindset? Because if he said, "I'm not going to speak to you without an attorney," and I'm making no statement, so thereby you cannot make assumptions. Well, you're there to do harm if to the former president, or you're there to do harm to somebody. You cannot make those assumptions, but those are logical theories that you have to investigate. So the FBI will probably re-engage with him to see if he will talk with them, and then if he agrees to talk with them, to get a better sense of why are you taking weapons of this caliber and magnitude to a very restricted area where you already have to. Tell us what is going through your mindset. They'll be able to get an idea of his mental health, his mental stability. They're also going to do as best as they can a full mental background to get an idea of anybody they might be seeing, and then it goes down to talking to neighbors. Are there witnesses that his neighbors, family, anybody else that he might have spoken to say, "Hey, I'm heading down to this rally, and I'm going to do harm. I'm going to take him out," or something that is not vague, but a viable threat. And that viable threat, if you can corroborate, in other words, perhaps more than one person backed up with something on his phone or computer, some sort of research similar to that of Ruth, to show that You don't have to provide a statement that says, I intended to do harm, but there's enough evidence to show, to support you were intending to do harm and the sheriff stopped you. With that combined, you have to prove that other element, that there was going to be some sort of actionable threat, that he wasn't just going to leave those weapons secured in a lockbox in the trunk of a vehicle, having no access to them, and that he was going to get out of his vehicle and walk without anything, any type of weaponry on him. Obviously, he was stopped before that, which is perfect. It's like textbook security doing their job. Um, but the what ifs are: was he going to park his vehicle if he was allowed to? Was he going to put a weapon conceal a weapon, and then attempt to compromise security at the next level, which would be Secret Service. Those things would have then given more indication of to what his intent was. But now the what ifs will remain what ifs um, if there's nothing else to corroborate and show concrete evidence of probable cause that he was intending to do harm to former President Trump with one of those weapons. And shy of that, then there could be additional federal charges on the firearms that might be able to hold the individual, and then, of course, suspend or be federally charged, and then, of course, state charges dismissed. All that will take place, I'm guessing, over the next few days, few weeks, until they've completed their background investigation of who this guy is about.
Still a lot of questions that are left to be answered. Very preliminary as we follow this developing news story. A man arrested outside of the Trump rally in Coachella, California, taken in to custody on charges of firearms. But Scott Duffey, former FBI special agent, we appreciate your time here just to give us a bit of insight as to really what constitutes an attempted assassination, also what we can expect going forward. Thank you.